Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today we're going to be counting down my top 10 favorite horror sequels. Much like I always point out, it's important to remember that this is just my personal list of top 10 horror sequels, and much like I've said before, I probably will change my mind on some of the placings of these in the future, but for now, let's just do it. So these are my top 10 all-time favorite horror sequels. So at number 10, we have The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring franchise, or the Conjuring universe, has kind of been a little bit hit and miss, I think, with people. Some of them have been really great, some of them have not been so great. And even though I think the first film, I would say, was more kind of effective and scarier than this one, I think this, just as a film, I think it's just a lot more better shot and well written and just compelling from a character standpoint, whilst also, of course, still being, really effectively well made and really just incredible. This was kind of the one that I think for a lot of people like me kind of started to really take notice of James Wan as director. I think he's just one of the best directors, out there working today, between this, the first Conjuring, Aquaman, Malignant, Insidious, of course, just a phenomenal director. And of course, this, honestly, I would say, of all the different films he's directed, this, I would say, is personally, as of right now, is my personal favorite. I think that this is his best film. This, of course, first introduced, one of the, creepiest elements of the Conjuring franchise, which, of course, is the character of the nun, which, of course, would eventually get their own solo movie. We've also got The Nun 2 coming, but this film in particular, much like Annabelle, I think, did the character more justice than in their actual solo movie that they got. And yeah, there's so many just wonderful creepy moments in this, and overall, I mean, again, with the whole third act and everything, it's just a really great, well constructed horror movie, and the perfect example of how to do a sequel to a great movie like The Conjuring. And in this case, my personal opinion, do it even better. So yeah, so that's The Conjuring 2 at number 10. At number 9, getting a little bit of Rob Zombie on this list, we have The Devil's Rejects, which of course is the sequel to Rob Zombie's first film, which of course is House of a Thousand Corpses. What's great about this movie is that you can kind of watch it as its own solo movie, and in many ways it does kind of feel like that, even though it's focusing on characters that we were already introduced to in the previous movie. It very much stands on its own, and to me, and I think a lot of people would agree, that this is kind of Rob Zombie's masterpiece. This is I think the best movie that Rob Zombie made, and it does everything that I think Rob Zombie is best at doing when it comes to directing, and so much of his style of what we would see in later movies was kind of already perfected, I would say, in this one. And it's just a absolutely wonderful roller coaster ride of a horror movie, and probably has one of my personal favorite endings of every horror movie. I mean, it's just an incredible movie. It's a road movie, but it's also a horror movie, which is something that I haven't seen a whole lot of, and it's really great, wonderful movie, and wonderfully dark and twisted, whilst also working as, a great sequel to an already great movie with House of a Thousand Corpses. Of course, Rob Zombie's movies, I know, are very hit and miss with people. A lot of people some people love Rob Zombie's movies, some people hate them. I'm kind of two minds about it. I think a lot of stuff he's done has been fantastic. A lot of stuff he's done has not been so good. This, though, I would say is definitely one of my favorites of his, and definitely probably my favorite film of his. So that's Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects at number 9. And now for number 8, going back to the old classics, we have The Bride of Frankenstein. This was very difficult for me because I knew I wanted to have, at least one of the classic, Universal monster films on this list, and this one is definitely was a big contender for me. I don't think I would personally put a lot of the other Universal horror films above this film, but I think just as when it comes to sort of direct sequels, I think this is probably the best one. And honestly, what made me put it on this list is the fact that, honestly, it is better than the original Frankenstein film, which is a great film in its own right, but this film, I would say, just takes that movie and just makes it even better, honestly. And this has so many elements in this of what people sort of traditionally associate with Frankenstein actually came from this movie, funnily enough. Boris Karloff, gets a lot more to do in this one than he did in the first film. And of course, the whole ending sequence, the "We Belong Dead" is just fantastic. And it's a movie that, was so inspirational for so many horror films to come, including so many of the other Universal monster films. And, again, personally, I would put a lot of the other Universal horror films above this, but it's definitely, when it comes to just sort of direct sequels, I would say it's probably the best that they ever did. So at number 8 is The Bride of Frankenstein. At number 7, we have Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. This, to me, is easily, without a doubt, the best film in the Friday the 13th franchise. This was kind of a big stepping stone in the franchise, because this was really the first time that they really went full-on supernatural. That, Jason died, we're gonna resurrect him Frankenstein style with a giant, bolt of electricity. And this was really when, the franchise definitely started kind of leaning more into sort of the comedy, more sort of lighter aspects. But whilst it didn't go where it went later in the franchise, where it got kind of too silly with Jason X and whatnot. So to me, this was kind of like, the perfect balance of everything that this franchise has had to offer, but in one movie. Tom McLaughlin was making his own Frankenstein movie basically with this. So that's Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6 at number 7. And then at number 6, we have Scream 2. The opening scene of this movie, I would argue, is pretty much on par, if not better, than the absolutely iconic opening scene from the first film. It does exactly what, I think a great, horror sequel should do. It follows what was so great about the first film, whilst also kind of doing its own thing as well. And even though Scream 2 obviously might not be as iconic as the first movie, I think as a sequel to the first movie, it's, again, I think pretty much about as good as you could possibly get. And I think that after the first movie, I do think that this is the best film in the franchise. And of course, also seeing, these great characters come back again. So that's Scream 2 at number 6. At number 5, a movie that has been very underrated for many, many years, but is finally, after 40 years, is finally kind of, really starting to get a lot more love. The love and respect that it deserves. We have Psycho 2. Probably the first legacy sequels, I guess, technically you could refer to as, because it was coming out, 22 years after the first Psycho film, with Anthony Perkins coming back to the role. And honestly, when I watched this movie for the first time, I was shocked at how good it actually was. And I was like, why don't more people talk about this? Because this, honestly, film to me, in my personal opinion, is like the perfect horror sequel. I mean, it builds on everything that the original Psycho film did so well, but at the same time, this movie just kind of goes in its own direction and is so original and has so much of an identity of its own. And I definitely think it's the best of the Psycho sequels. Much like Scream, I would say the Psycho franchise overall is actually a pretty consistently good franchise, but Psycho 2 is, without a doubt, to me, easily, the best one of the sequels that we got. Anthony Perkins' performance in this, I would argue just his performance alone, I think is even better than it was in the first film, because he has a lot more to do with here. The whole paranoia of, where he's freaking out, where even he himself is not sure if he is, killing again or not. And the whole mystery aspect of this, it did such a great job, because there was so much mystery and intrigue in the original film. This movie just does a great job of setting up its own mystery and its own intrigue and its own set of circumstances, whilst also building on that first movie. And it's an awesome sequel, and it should be, considered to be a prime example of how to do a horror sequel right. It's a fantastic movie, and I've loved it more and more every time I've watched it. Great movie. So that's Psycho 2 at number 5. At number 4, we have Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. I, of course, had the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre on my top 10 horror movies list, and I've always been a massive fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, and I honestly think it's pretty much almost on par with that first movie. Basically, this is completely tonally its own thing, separate from the first film. In some ways, it's almost kind of like a parody of the first movie in some ways. There's definitely a lot more of an inherent sort of comedy, a really sort of dark or black comedy aspect to this, which some people people have argued that, there are some elements of that in the original movie, and even Tobe Hooper himself kind of said that there were some kind of, elements of sort of black and dark comedy in the original film. But this film in particular really kind of goes for it, and in my opinion, it's one of those things that, for some people it's not going to work as well. For me, it does work really, really well, and is kind of what makes this stand out on its own as being its own fantastic movie, whilst also being just a great sequel to that first film. The whole look and aesthetic of this, with the lighting and the setting and everything, is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, this to me, I would say, is probably one of the most just ironically just gorgeous looking horror movies. And again, I love the whole aesthetic look and feel of this. It's a fantastic sequel. I love it. So that's Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 at number 4. At number 3, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, ironically, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. This, to me, honestly, I personally would say that this film is the best film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Yes, even more than that first movie, because to me, everything that made that first movie great is in this film. And to me, that's kind of, when it comes to sequels being, better than the original film, to me, it's always about, well, if it has everything that was great in the first movie, but whilst also doing so many other great things, then to me, that's kind of what makes it or breaks it when it comes to being, better than the first film. Robert Englund's performance as Freddy Krueger, I think, is better in this. I think he's given a lot more to do. This was sort of before he started becoming a little bit too wisecracky in some of the other movies. He was still sort of a menacing force. But what really makes this movie to me is, the whole setting and the characters. These are probably some of the most beloved characters in a slasher movie ever, because when these characters die, you really feel for them. And the way that this is when the franchise really got super creative with the whole dream aspect of, the dreams can kill you, and the whole idea of, giving our different main characters, they kind of manifest their own powers. And this to me was the one that really kind of played with the whole dreamscape aspect and actually delivered on, because dreams, what you can do and see in dreams is practically almost unlimited. So, and this one, I really felt like of all the films in the franchise was the one that really got the most creative with it, and really kind of stood out as to, what makes the Nightmare on Elm Street, series a unique series as compared to, Halloween or Friday the 13th. Definitely, one of the best slasher sequels, and also being, one of the best horror sequels. So it's a fantastic movie. So that's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 at number 3. But number 2, ironically, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, as it's sometimes referred to as. Absolutely one of those examples of a horror sequel that is definitely better than the original film. When this franchise really became its own and became unique and really became, a standout amongst other horror films, was with this film. And it was because of the, the aspect of comedy. And the original film wasn't really supposed to be a comedy. It was more kind of, it was unironically kind of funny. But this film really leans into the comedy aspect. But to me, what is so great about Evil Dead 2 and what makes it such a great horror sequel, and what makes it such a great horror comedy, is the fact that the comedy parts are funny, but the horror parts are scary as well, and are scary and creepy and gruesome. To me, horror comedy is not something that you can do easily, but somehow Evil Dead 2, they were able to crack the code, honestly, when it comes to this type of movie. And it's just an absolute blast of a movie, and is so much fun to watch. Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Evil Dead 2 at number 2. At number 1, this was definitely a very difficult choice to make. That was also number 1 on another one of my lists. We have Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Now, I know some might argue that this isn't a horror movie. I would disagree. This is a, again, much like Evil Dead 2, this is, I would say, is a horror comedy, absolutely. Is it perhaps, maybe you could argue in some elements more comedy than horror? Yes, but honestly, to me, it's still a horror comedy because it's a movie that I just absolutely love so much. When I was putting this list together, it was just like, Gremlins 2, it's gotta be number 1. And my personal opinion is better than the first Gremlins. I think it works just so well as a comedy, but also, you know, having, you know, a lot of great, you know, horror scare elements, especially with all the various different designed Gremlins. I mean, there's so many just references to horror films and such in this, especially with, you know, the Grandpa Fred character, and, you know, Christopher Lee being in it, that, you know, for horror fans, it really is sort of, I would say it's a comedy movie that's made for horror fans, if that makes sense. I feel like that's the best way that you can kind of describe a movie like Gremlins 2. And yeah, it's a movie that just, it's definitely one of my all-time favorites. It's one of those that I just watch every once in a while, because I just love it so much. And yeah, so that's Gremlins 2 at number 1. So there you go, guys. That was my list, my personal list of top 10 personal favorite horror sequels. Be sure to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your personal top 10 favorite horror sequels are. And yeah, so thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more videos. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible. And I will see you in the next video.